Oh man, it feels so good to say it again. Well, hello. Well, hello. Well, hello, Mike Manley.
Hello, Jamar Nicholas.
What are you reading there, Mike?
I'm reading a December 1946 issue of Jack and Jill
Oh man.
magazine. And then on the back, you can see they have the guy's address.
What, the guy that drew it?
No, the guy that gave 2 cents postpaid.
Oh, gotcha. So, like, where'd you get that? One of your spelunking missions?
Yeah, I can see this guy. Street.
Wow. Yeah, let's go visit him.
He's probably dead. Mr. John, Mrs. John McClellan,
That's very old school.
5542 Market Street
In Philly?
in Philly.
That's real old school when women had to go by their husband's name in the post, right?
Yeah, we can piss all of our female readers off, right? Viewers off. That's the way it should be. Damn it!
You said that. I had nothing to do with that one.
No, I like. Sometimes you find like a really old magazine like this, and they had like limited color.
Mm-hmm.
So you would find very interesting ways to do. Just
Oh, let me give you the screen there.
like something like that.
Oh yeah.
Limited color.
Yeah, look at that.
We saw that a lot, very often, especially during the war. A lot of magazines would have to do. They couldn't get all 4 colors of ink, so they would do like red and blue. Red and green.
Mm-hmm.
Yellow and red. Then you mix those tones, and you end up getting,
Like our boy Burl Ives, silver and gold.
you can get your yum yum macaroons.
Oh, those look tasty.
I
I love some of those old school recipes, kind of like gelatin molds. Oh, nice. Like paper dolls. That's funny.
Yeah. I even remember there used to be something in the newspaper at one time that I think that were paper dolls. I seem to remember that.
You sent away for that?
Yeah, sent away, mail order bride, paper doll.
The notorious JRD just says, and the spot color would be on the same leaf later in the magazine to save on the printing. Yeah. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, they would have certain certain sections or signatures.
Mm-hmm.
Because everything is in a signature of 4.
Yeah.
So 4, 8, 16, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And then they would have sections in a magazine that were sometimes mostly black and white, and there would be one signature where you would have maybe a 16-page signature in color. Now in color. In fact, the draw was like that in the beginning. It wasn't always full color.
Right, I remember that.
Like a 16-page or so section that was in color.
I was about to bring this up, but I don't want to embarrass anybody. But I found one of the most not nice interviews about Draw Magazine. Some guy on YouTube was like, I picked up this issue of Draw Magazine because Joe Jusko was the cover feature. I love Joe Jusko. And he flipped through the whole magazine and went through each section. He was like, I love this. Look, this looks like Boris artwork. I love Joe Jusko. The rest of these guys, I don't know who Jerry Ordway is.
That was your dog.
It wasn't the dog. I don't know who this Ordway fella is, but it was funny. All right,
and I'm unwilling to learn.
Oh well, yeah. He was just like, he was even saying things like, I don't like. They talk about inking a lot in this magazine. I don't know what that's about. I don't really like comics, but I like Joe Jusko. That's the wildest thing. But let's get started. Hey guys, welcome back to Pencil to Pencil, your favorite pandemic podcast. Now on Wednesdays, we've decided to shrink back our production a little bit for the winter solstice. So we'll be coming at you Wednesdays, and you still get the great JN and Mike. What days?
We'll be on Wednesdays, and then the next Wednesday.
All right. Well, every Wednesday.
Every Wednesday.
We just got to get through some heavy projects. We got to get through the holidays and the cold winter, and then we'll see what happens on the other end. But I'm glad to be back. I'd like to give a shout out. See the John up there? You know what the John is. Look up there at the John and see that our good friends at Graphics League make your favorite comic book making device, Clip Studio Paint. Also, if you take a point the tail up, there you go. Our good buddy John Morrow, speaking of Draw Magazine, our good buddy John Morrow is the publisher of Two Morrows Publishing and the publisher of Draw Magazine. Go check him out at twomorrows.com for your comic book needs. We have Studio Cats as well.
Studio Cat tonight.
Guys, I just want to get right into this because Mike Hawthorne just says, Mike's coughing. Stay safe. Wash those Kirby hands, Mike.
Oh, I'm okay. I'm fine.
Good to see you, Mike.
Only a little bit of blood.
We have a whole lot of superstars on this program, Mike Manley. Besides yourself,
all superstars.
All superstars. It's AAA plus, Platinum plus. We have the pleasure of meeting with JOE JUSKO tonight. Joe's been hanging out in our green room, sifting through the Chex Mix. I think he just likes the pretzel bits and not the other stuff. There's nothing but peanuts left in the bottom of the bowl. But we're going to bring him in. We're going to have a nice chat. If this is your first time watching us live, hello. We're on YouTube and Facebook, running live right now. If you have FaceTube, my face. If you have a question for Joe or Mike or myself, please put it in the chat if you're watching on YouTube or in the comments on Facebook. I can't guarantee I'll get to everybody, but I'll do my best. All right, so let's bring him on in. Joe, thanks for hanging out with us.
Hey, how you doing, guys?
Great. You sound great.
Well, I want to tell you, I'm starting off in a really bad mood because the green room, I asked for only green peanut M&Ms, and I didn't have them.
You know what? Your people, they wouldn't get. All right, I'll make no excuses. We'll follow your rider for the next.
Okay, all right, fair enough. Just don't let this happen again if I ever come back.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I appreciate you. Thanks for hanging out with us tonight, Joe.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Hang on a second. There we go.
Yeah, you got to get the do right.
Headphones. Yeah, I know. Headphones are not hair friendly. Here we go.
So, Mike and Joe, why don't you start the engine and I'll monitor the chat. Let's get started.
Okay. Well, Joe, why don't you give us a little bit of your history and how you started, and just to sort of get people up to speed a little bit on. I mean, I know we covered it when we interviewed in the magazine, but there's always new people, so I think it's always good to begin at the beginning.
All right. Well, I first discovered comics when I was really young, I don't know, I guess 6 or 7 years old, because my older brother used to bring them home. And I think the first comic I ever bought on my own was Avengers 57 and 58 off A Kid in the Playground. And it was that first Vision story that John Buscema did. And and I saw John's work and I was like, holy crap. I said, it just blew me away. And I was like, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. My older brother used to draw. So I started to draw. Just watching him do it, and once I realized that I kind of had a talent for it, I drew a Fred Flintstone head off the TV screen one time, and it looked like Fred Flintstone in Craypaws, when I was like 7 years old. And remember Craypaws? Those messy oil. They still make those? I don't even know if they still make them.
I think they do. I do.
Yeah.
Do they?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I started drawing. And I just kind of never stopped. I grew up in a fairly poor neighborhood, so drawing was my out, from the everyday life over there.
Was anybody in your family artistic?
My older brother. My older brother was, but he eventually gave it up, and I just never stopped. His none of his friends were artistically inclined, and he chose to go to a Catholic high school where I went to art and design high school in New York City. And I just kind of. I just kept it up, and he just didn't. But he kind of lived vicariously through me then for the rest of my life.
Is that the Fame High School?
No, the Fame High School is music and art on 125th Street, or 126th Street or something like that. Art and design was on 57th and 2nd. It used to be the School of Industrial Arts, and that's where Neil Adams went, and John Romita, Tony Bennett, a bunch of other guys, and then they moved it to the new location on 2nd Avenue and 57th Street, and that school really peppered our industry for a good couple of decades. I mean, Larry Hama, Jimmy Palmiotti, Mark Texera, Joe Manalera. I mean, it's amazing how many guys went to that school. Joe Rubenstein. It goes on. But
was it like a trade school?
It's a vocational high school. It's an actual city high school, but it was the only vocational high school of its kind that was taught by professional illustrators. And your curriculum for half the day were art classes. You know, you took math and science and reading and stuff, but half the curriculum were art classes. So for the first couple of years, you got electives and you got like a basic art class and stuff, and they would to kind of gear you toward what you wanted to major in. And then you picked your major in 11th to 12th grade. And I chose illustration over cartooning because cartooning was more political cartooning and stuff like that. And illustration was more illustration. And Bertie Krickstein was one of my teachers, actually, in art and design. Yeah.
For the people who don't know, the classical EC artist used to do all, signed his name Ghastly.
Yeah, no, that was a different guy.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's the guy that Bernie was inspired by. Yeah, Ghastly Ingalls.
Right.
He drew a master race, that thing with the train.
Rick Krickstein.
That really famous story where it was like so ahead of its time storytelling wise. With you could see, it looked like when the train goes by in the window and you're seeing people like staccato. I mean, how he pulled it off is just amazing. And he was a nice guy. He didn't talk much about comics. It's almost like he kind of wanted to put it behind him. But if you knew who he was and he kind of respected you, he would talk about it a little bit. But for the most part, he just kind of he wanted to make believe that part of his life didn't happen.
Oh, wow. And you guys kept bringing it up.
Yeah, well, you know, the comic geek in me, you know.
Right.
Don't give me a bone.
Yeah. So now, who else did you have as a teacher? Any other comic?
No other comic guys, but there were a few guys who were like really. I mean, like I said, they were all ex-professional illustrators. There was this guy Richard Taylor, who was the guy who did the Scotsman for the whiskey ads. Mm-hmm. Remember those ads where the guy was all over the world? He used to paint those. He used to paint those things, and I had him when I first went I think freshman year in 9th grade, the very first semester. I had him as my teacher. And he was just incredible. He really was. He really cared about the students, and he brought in some of his stuff one day, and I was just like, holy crap. I mean, he had I never forget, he had a painting of a guy holding an orange, and you could see like all the indentations in the orange. And I was like, when you're 14, you're like, holy shit, how do you do this?
Right.
You know?
Right.
You know, but it was great. It's still the only kind of the school of its kind in the country that gears you toward a career in professional art in high school, which is phenomenal, you know. And it's still around. I think the curriculum changed a little bit. I think it's less art now and a little bit more academics, but it's still in existence.
Yeah, I think Al went there too. I think
a bunch of guys. Really. I mean, the list of guys in our industry for like from the 60s and the 70s. You know, who went to that school? It's a who's who. It really is. It's pretty amazing.
No, did he ever do demos for you in class? Like
he would teach you to do stuff. I remember he used to give us like really bizarre projects to work on. One was we had to do a crucifixion and cross hatching. So he wanted everybody in the class to do their version of the crucifixion, but it had to be in cross hatching. Wow. You know, so yeah, so you sat there and you had to cross hatch all this stuff out and everything. And I remember I was working, I was so bored with it. I was sitting there, I was brush inking like a Tarzan piece or something. It looked like an old Frazetta drawing or something like that. He walked by and he looked at me and he goes, yeah, all right, we know how you use a brush. Let's see how you use a pen now. You know, and he was pretty cool if he thought that you took art seriously, you know, because he was really serious. He was a hard teacher. Yeah. But yeah, he taught you illustration, not comics. He never approached comics at all.
That's funny. That's funny. I remember as I went to kind of like the equivalent of that in Philadelphia, the performing arts high school. And before I was there at my regular neighborhood school, like art class was where people hid out
Mhm.
between classes to like where you make the clay cigars and steel paper.
I was I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead.
I was pretty lucky actually, because even in grade school, I went to a Catholic grade school on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, and there was my art teacher there. This guy Henry Fiol was a really cool guy. You know, we had nuns, but they were starting to get lay teachers in now who were more geared toward you learning what you wanted to learn. And he knew I liked art, so his art classes where he brought in like cans of house paint one time and had us do paintings in there. And I remember I copied a leopard head out of one of those J. Wilderwing Walter T. Forster books, The Cats in Action. Remember those? Remember the Walter T. Forster books? Yep. There was one called The Cats in Action, and there was a great shot of a leopard head in there. And I painted that in house paints in the art class when I was in like 6th grade. You know, so my cat fixation goes back a ways, I guess. But he was really cool, and he was really inspiring and really encouraging to follow the art. So when it came time to pick high schools, he made sure that myself and a couple other guys took the test for art and design. And you know, and I'm glad I made it, because I really had no other plan. I didn't want to go to a regular high school. I wanted to go to art and design, and I was fortunate that I made it.
No, were you thinking then, like, okay, I'll do this, and this is a path? And did you know that other people had gone, other professionals had gone to that school? So you're thinking, okay, this will be my in?
No. I didn't actually until I got there. I didn't know the history of the school, and I had never been to a Comic-Con. I read comics my entire life. You know, I knew who my favorite artists were, and what I wanted my stuff to look like. But art and design was it was an art school, and I figured, hey, well, that's where I should go. And once I got in there, you got to learn a little bit more about what the school offered as far as ancillary programs and stuff. Like they offered an internship at Marvel when you were in your junior year. You got to do 6 months as an intern at Marvel, and it counted as 6 months of your class. And I didn't apply for it because I was really nervous. I didn't want to go up there and fail, you know, and have them remember me as a guy who didn't know what he was doing when I went to go look for work later on. So I passed on the internship. And I didn't do it.
Did somebody of merit get it?
I really don't know. I really don't know who got it. I know that they asked me if I wanted to do it, and I just didn't feel I was ready. You know, and that's the thing. You have to be honest with yourself as to where you are compared to other people. You know, as we know by talking to a lot of fans at cons, a lot of guys don't have that honesty with their own work is concerned. And I knew that I just, you know, and I was going to go spend 6 months learning paste up, you know, and they were teaching me that in school already. So I decided to not do that and just wait. And I had gone up there. This is when the school was on 57th Street and 2nd Avenue, and Marvel was on 57th and Madison. Remember 575 Madison Avenue?
Right, yeah.
So I went up there one time. I think it was it 11th grade? It might have been 11th grade. Well, maybe it was 10th grade, which is why I turned down the internship. And I had dropped off a portfolio, because you can go up there at that time and just go up to the 7th floor, 6th floor, and drop off your portfolio with the receptionist, and it would go to John Romita, and John Romita would look over your portfolio, and then they would call you and tell you when you could pick it up, and you'd get a little note in there from John. So I dropped off, and I wish I still had the note, because I got back the portfolio with my samples in it. I did some samples of pinup stuff, and I did a couple of pages of sequentials. And I got back this encouraging letter from him going, yeah, this is really good. Obviously, it was done by a kid who was in 10th grade. And it's like, you know, your stuff shows a lot of promise. You got to work on this, and this, you know, and I look forward to seeing your work in the future. And so that was kind of cool. But the fact that I got turned down, I think when they offered the internship, I went, let me not push my luck and go back and double down and look like I suck again, you know? So I figured I would wait.
Didn't have John Romita say, didn't I tell you the future, Joe?
I love that man. I really do. He was just the greatest guy, man. I mean, so encouraging. Even when I first started up there, you know, he was just, you can always go to him, and he always looked at your stuff with a critical eye, but a real positive assessment. You know, he never made you feel like you didn't know what you were doing, which was incredible.
Yeah, I think which is a really key ingredient to being a good teacher, which is to be able to give someone a critique in a way that it's trying to give them something positive to make their work better, and not making them feel like crap.
Right. Right.
Because then that crushes your spirit. And there's some teachers that are like that. They're like the tough love. Like, I'm going to step on your fingers. And then if you keep coming back after I step on them 5 times, I like, okay.
All right.
I had a teacher at art and design who actually told me that I should look for another line of work. And years later, he came to me at one of the church cons in New York City, because he was a local New York City guy. He's a comic book, and he came to me and he goes, I have to apologize to you for what I told you back in high school. And I didn't remember him saying this to me, but he adamantly said, because I remember telling you that you should look for a different line of work because you're never going to make it in the comic industry. He goes, and I want to apologize to you for that.
Well, there was that kind of era of teachers who profess tough love, right?
Yeah.
They're kind of like either you eat it or you weren't built for this business in the first place.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So those are my high school years, and then upon graduation, they gave out awards from different companies and stuff like that, and I got the DC Award of Excellence in Cartooning, which is ironic because in 40 years I've done maybe 3 jobs for them. it's like I ended up a roundabout way how this happened. So I got that, and I decided I didn't want to go to college. I wanted to take the summer off and put together a portfolio and figure out what I wanted to do, and where I wanted to go and see if I could make a living at it. Because it probably would have benefited me to go to college to get some instruction in illustration, because a lot of I'm all like trial and error, self-taught as a painter. And that letter from DC Comics came with a gift certificate to an art supply store. It was a $50 gift certificate.
Which one?
Right.
You remember?
Yeah, which supply store do you remember?
Eastern Artist Supplies was a block away from the school.
Oh, wow.
Matter of fact, hang on. Here you go.
Oh,
My DC Comics Award of Excellence in Cartooning.
Wow, that's amazing.
who signed it?
So it's Sal Harrison.
So, okay.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, so I still have that hanging because I just find it ironic that I got that upon graduation, and then and I've done really very little work for them over the years. But so that summer I graduated, and I spent the gift certificate on paints because as much as I wanted to do comics, again, being honest with yourself, I'm not one of those guys who's a natural draftsman who could knock out like page after page after page, and knowing what it would take to do a monthly book. I was like, I don't think I'm gonna be able to do that. I have more of an illustrator's mindset and my attention span is about that long, So I think doing the same thing over and over again wasn't really what I felt I was going to be good at doing. So that summer I bought some oil paints, I bought some acrylics, I bought some gouache, and that summer I kind of taught myself to paint. I did a sample oil painting for myself. I did a couple of gouache paintings, did acrylic painting, and that was my portfolio.
Wow.
And were you reading any books on?
Yeah. Well, to this day, I'll buy an art book. I'll buy somebody's art book if there's a technique section in the back, because I want to see how they work. And if I can sort of cobble something from how they work, that's how they do that, and cobble it somehow, acclimate that into my own style, my own process. A lot of what I learned early on, I learned from that stuff. Like I bought a Vargas book, and they had a technique section in the back of the Vargas book, right? And I was doing a lot of watercolor stuff back then because I really didn't know how to use any one medium properly. So I was doing the whole mixed media thing. All those early Savage Sword covers and Hulk covers, they're magic marker, they're acrylic, they're gouache, they're all kinds of shit. And I read in the back that he used to mix glycerin with water, a couple of drops of glycerin to keep the water wet, which is how he got those soft blends and those soft shades. So I said, well, if I do that, if I kind of paint the thing, I can put like a wash of water and glycerin over, and when I highlight it, it'll soften the blend and make it. And that's why a lot of that stuff, even early on, looks like it's highly rendered, but it's just like painted into wet glycerin, like water and glycerin. It's sort of softened it up. So I did that for a while, and you just pick stuff up here and there as to how, and then you drop stuff off, at some point you make and the more you paint, obviously you pick up techniques of your own that work for you, and that's how I learned. I learned from books and just from trial and error,
Did you have a period of your career, in your early freelance career, where you were just throwing darts at the wall trying to get gigs?
Oh yeah. It's that summer that I did those paintings, I had worked at a comic store my junior and senior year of high school, a place called Black Star Comics on First Avenue and Second Street. That's been gone for decades. That was originally opened by a guy who owned a moving company. He used to have a moving storage company. He opened up that store to sell secondhand stuff that people weren't picking up from the storage units. And he realized that the comics was selling better than the furniture and the lamps and stuff like that. So one of the guys who worked for him knew comic books, and they turned it into a comic shop. And it was one of those pedophile looking comic shops with the bare floors and the fluorescent light fixtures, and the holes in the walls. It was a horrid place in an old in a storefront of an old tenement building, And I started to hang out there, and I met the guy, and then he hired me, and I ended up basically running the place for the last year that I was in high school. I would open it when I got out of school, and I'd run it on Saturdays and Sundays and stuff, So I knew the guys from another comic shop up in Greenwich Village. It was like the main comic shop in the city, aside from Super Snipe, which was also in town, right? Remember Super Snipe on 84th Street? Well, this was Village Comic Art on 6th Avenue and 3rd Street by the Waverly Theater. And that was where all the comic guys used to go. So I was hanging out there one day, and Howard Chaykin walked in, and I happened to have my portfolio with me. So the guy who ran the place said, "Howard, this is my buddy Joe. He wants to break into the business." And it just so happened that Howard's assistant had just left. I think it might have been Bill Ray, but the guy I think right before me. It might have been Bill, and he was looking for an assistant. So he looked at my stuff. And I had those 3 paintings that I did that summer. I had a watercolor painting I had an oil, and I had a gouache painting of some girl and a werewolf or something. And he went, okay. He goes, well, you want a gig for me, and and I need somebody to do backgrounds and do like color effects on. He was doing Empire at the time, and I was like, sure, yeah, okay, I guess. He goes, well, I can't pay you a lot. It's like $20 a week or something like that, or $20 a day. Was it $20 a day? I don't think it was $20 a day back in 1977. But I said sure. So I started that December of '77. I started working for Howard, and he said to me, he goes, so what do you want to do? When you start to work on your own. I said, well, I want to paint. I don't really want to do comics. He said, well, DC doesn't have magazines. Marvel does, so I'll try to get you into Marvel, but first let me send you to heavy metal. So he sent me up to heavy metal, I was 18 years old, and with those 3 sample paintings that I did, and heavy metal bought one. They bought one of them for a cover, yeah. I mean, I was like,
I remember that cover. That was pretty early on, right?
The one with it was like issue 15 or something like that. The girl with the saber-tooth tiger head. And they bought the cover, and I was like, oh, shit, and in hindsight, I should have been more flabbergasted that they bought it. I was like, holy shit, I came back and said, yeah, they bought a cover, and they commissioned another one. They commissioned a calendar piece from me. And then Howard said, well, now that you're published, and then when the book finally came, he said, now that you're published, I can send you to Marvel. And he sent me to Marvel with those same 3, basically the same 3 paintings. Maybe I had one different one because I was working for him, so I didn't have much time to paint. And Marvel saw the paintings, and they hired me and gave me a storybook cover based on those 3 paintings.
Well, you got a lot of longevity out of those paintings.
Well, and it really is. It's really weird. Like I tell people all the time, I kind of broke in at the right time, right place. Because if you look at that early stuff, I mean, that heavy metal cover is unique. It has a nice flavor to it. The actual paintings were freaking horrible because I didn't know how to paint. I just made up that shit. And the first few paintings I did for Marvel were awful. They were really awful. But I broke in at a time when they were looking for people to paint, and most people didn't paint in comics. Now everybody works in color, But back in the late '70s, almost nobody did. They had paperback guys doing covers. They had Bob Larkin, they had Boris, they had Norum. They had guys who painted doing the magazine covers, but comic guys didn't work in color. So I filled a niche that I need at the time, and they saw something in my work, and they kept hiring me, and I was able to learn on the job, and once I got in, I looked at Bob and I looked at Earl and I looked at the stuff that was being done, and I said, well, I better get better quickly, if I want to
look at their stuff when you went in. Would you go and look at the originals or anything?
If I was up in the office, that was the great thing about being in Manhattan. I can go up to the office whenever I wanted to, So early on, I was up in the office maybe 3 times a week, just to go up and say hi and hang out. and kind of hover around and wait for some to see if any work popped up and stuff like that. But I would see Larkin came in, and he dropped off a couple of covers one time, and there was one that I remember distinctly. It was a Star-Lord cover of a guy on an asteroid fighting a lion-headed alien guy. I don't know if you, and I was like, holy shit! And the color in it was absolutely amazing, you know. And I saw Norm. Norm would bring up his stuff, you know, occasionally. He would come into the office, and he was old school. He always had a suit on, you know, a jacket, and his stuff was always matted. You know, like the old time advertising guys, they all had presentation mats on them. Every painting he brought up was matted. You know, and it was different. It really was. So I learned a lot from seeing how those guys worked and seeing the originals and everything. And I studied those two guys a lot early on because I was working at Marvel and I wanted my stuff to be Marvel compatible. You know, so I learned a lot. I learned a lot from Earl and especially Bob, because Bob worked really tightly. And that's what I wanted my stuff to look like. Like a lot of people think that Boris was my major influence back then. It was really Larkin.
And he was acrylic, or was he gouache?
He was gouache, which is astounding. You know, when you look at his stuff, it's hard to believe it's gouache. But yeah, he worked exclusively in gouache.
And Joe, how old were you?
I was 18. So I was 18. So here I am. I'm 18 years old, and I'm in a trifecta with Bob Larkin and Earl Norm painting covers for Marvel. Did
you? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
That's okay.
Did you feel any kind of ageism in the reverse because you're like so young there? Or
no. See, that's the thing. It's like Marvel back then was such a welcoming place. They were experimental, you know. And I asked Jim Shooty years later. We were at a convention, maybe 5 years ago, sitting at the bar, and I said, I'm amazed that you guys kept giving me work back then because I really didn't know what I was doing. And he said, he goes, and I grew up on Marvel Comics, I kind of knew their dynamic and what they wanted, and what made a good Marvel cover, which I think was my saving grace back then. And he said, your stuff was really raw, but you were doing what we wanted. You knew what we wanted in a cover, so we were willing to let you, to learn, and you were getting better at a fairly rapid pace. Except for the cover that they killed, my third cover ever. Stan was still up there at Marvel at the time, and I did another Star-Lord cover. And Chaykin was this proponent of doing big paintings. He had this thing where all the covers he did were like 30 by 40, and he goes, "You got to do big paintings because art directors are impressed and editors are impressed by big paintings. They're stupid, and even if the painting sucks, if it's big, they'll love it." So I did a couple of 30 by 40 magazine covers. One was a Hulk cover that actually got published, and the next one was a Star-Lord cover that I lost. It was so overly ambitious. It was Star-Lord and a slave girl, and there were planets blowing up behind them, spaceships, and it was so beyond what I was capable of at the time. And I did this painting, I handed it in, and they vouched it. And like 4 months later, the book came out with an Earl Norm cover of basically the scene that I did. They gave it the Earl to repaint because they hated the cover. I was told that Stan was the one that turned it down, but I don't know. I don't know if it was Stan or somebody else. Or they just blamed Stan for it. But yeah, it's when you hear that Stan Lee hated your cover and had it reassigned, you're like, holy shit, my career's over. And when you're 18 years old, 18 or 19 years old, and you get a cover killed by Stan, you're like, oh my God, it's like, how am I going to recover from this? But they just kept giving me work, and it was not a lot of work, but it was work. So I was slowly, getting better, and getting a little bit more and more work. But there was only so much to go around up there,
Well, did you go out in because New York was still the mecca of advertising at that time,
right?
Going around trying to get other paperback cover work. You're trying to do other things besides just working for Marvel, or
no? See, I was kind of comfortable with Marvel because I was accepted there, and I was kind of insecure, back then because I really didn't think my work was that good. And again, the same thing as happened with the internship. I didn't want to go up to paperback houses because I didn't think I was good enough for paperback houses. I just didn't think I was good enough for that. And so I was content to stay working for Marvel because I'd gotten in there and I'm like, okay, well, this is a secure environment for me. Let me see what I can do here. But the work wasn't plentiful. I mean, it was steady, but it really wasn't enough to survive on because they only published so many magazines. And especially when they cut most of their magazine line. You know, I was only getting so much work there. So I had to make a decision as to whether I was going to stay and do that for a living, because I was still living at home. I couldn't afford to move out, you know, still living with my parents. So I made a slight career detour for a while. Yeah.
Well, that's a little bit more than a slight.
Well, yeah. It's my mom, who was always really encouraging, you know, with my art career. You know, she used to bring like Savage Sword magazines home and show her friends at work. You know, look, my son got fan mail from Australia. You know, I mean, she was just like she was just amazed by that her son was doing that. But she finally said, she goes, "You're not really making a great living doing this, and you know I've always supported you. So you should think about getting like a real job." You know, and the police department was starting to hire again after a 15-year moratorium. So I took the test for the police department, because that was the other thing I was always interested in. You know, my favorite shows when I was a kid. My favorite shows were Adam 12 and, you know, and Dragnet and the FBI, every cop show you could possibly watch, I watched as a kid. I had two uncles who were cops. I had a cousin who was a cop. Okay. You know,
like in the family.
Yeah. So that they opened up tests again, and I took the test with a couple of friends of mine, because in my neighborhood, which was not really a good neighborhood, you either became a cop or a fireman, or you went to jail or got killed. You know, it was just it was the Lower East Side.
That cover artist was not one of the.
yeah, exactly. But the Alphabet City in the 70s was not a very fun place to be. You know, so I took the test and I made it. And I told them up at Marvel that you know, I'm going to be leaving and doing this. And my idea at the time was that I would do that full time. I would do like some freelance work on the side, and then I'd retire in 20 years and go back into art full time again, which sounded great at the time, but in hindsight, it was kind of like really unrealistic. But I did the best I could with that. I graduated the police academy. I worked up in Washington Heights and then in the South Bronx, and I would take my overtime in time, because you had an option. You could take it in cash, you could take it in time. If you took it in cash, they taxed the hell out of it, so it really wasn't worth working the overtime. But you could take the amount of time that you worked overtime and take it in time off. So I would take the time and I would do covers on the side. You know, Larry Hama contacted me and asked me if I wanted to do a Savage Sword cover, and that started me back up again, doing covers. And after a few years of doing that, you know, it's like I kind of realized that's really what my passion was. You know, from the time I was a kid, and no one ever tried to shoot me for painting a bad picture. You know, so maybe I should take the plunge and go back into it full time again. And I went to talk to Tom DeFalco, and I said, "Listen, I'm thinking about doing this. Could you guys, you know, guarantee me work if I decide to come back and do this full time?" And Tom, you know, was always really gracious with me, and he said, "Look, we'll give you as much work as we can possibly find for you. You know, if that's not a problem. I love what you do." And I left, and the Marvel press posters were starting at the time, and the Marvel Special Projects division was in bloom. 83 through 86, I was a cop, and then I left and went back into art full time again. Late 86.
Joe, let me ask you a couple of questions about that, because that's a cataclysmic career shift.
Yeah, just a little.
Right. So, like, was there any pushback from your family or anybody else in your life who's like, well, wait a minute, you can't give up your benefits and your pension and all that stuff to go draw comics?
Yeah. My mother was, of course, you know, are you sure you're doing the right thing? But, you know, they knew, you know, she used to buy me all my art supplies when I was a kid. You know, I mean, my first two art books I ever got were Fritz Willis's. I was like 10. And she got me Fritz Willis's The Nude and the Model, you know, the Walter T. Foster books. Yeah. You know, so she knew, and it's what I wanted to do. And you're an adult, you know. It's like obviously I get to make my own choices, and it took. I'm sure it wasn't. They weren't thrilled with it, but they never really told me that I was making the wrong choice.
Well, it sounds like you came from a really supportive background where I could see if you were from a different family, they would be like, "Oh, hell no, you're not leaving."
Well, you know, it's weird. My mother was a seamstress. You know, she made a lot of her own clothes. You know, she worked in a supermarket as a job. You know, she was a cashier in a supermarket. We didn't have a lot of money growing up. My father really was was not the greatest guy in the face of the earth. You know, I don't remember him ever holding a job. You know, I had heard he was a construction worker, but for the most part, he never worked as far as I knew, you know. Not terribly encouraging until years later, you know, it's, I told him, you know, that he should, no, you didn't, you know. But you know, my the talent comes from my mother's side of the family. You know, my uncle, who I'm named after, was a violinist, you know, really good violinist. So she understood wanting to follow your passion as far as art or some kind of skill goes.
I have a question, Joe, from the room. So this goes back a little bit into when you were talking about painting those really large paintings from Marvel. So our good buddy J. Robert Deans asks, this is going back a little bit, Mr. Jusko, when you were producing the cards for Marvel, which is a little bit forward, how large were you working? And did you work at a smaller size than you wanted to expedite the work?
Well, okay. Well, the Marvel cards are an interesting thing. I mean, I had been working in the business for, I guess, 14 years at that point. This was 92 when these things came up. And Marvel had started their trading card project, I guess, a couple of years before that. They had like 3 sets of Marvel Universe cards, and then Jim Lee did a standalone X-Men set, a pen and ink standalone X-Men set. So their next, they were always trying to figure out what to do next with the cards, and the next obvious step was a painted card set. And since I was doing at that point most of the painted work up at Marvel, I was the logical guy to ask to do it. You know, how'd you like to do this card set? And I didn't think much of it. I looked at Jim Lee's stuff, and his originals were like 5x7, you know, and I was like, okay, well, it's trading card art, you know, it's single figure stuff. I could probably do this, you know, and it was the most money I'd ever seen doing this for a living, you know, and the reason I came back into art full time was trying to get a living doing it. So the money was so much more than I had ever seen before. And I said, sure, I'll do it. And then they gave me 3 months to paint the 100 cards. You know, so by the way, the deadline is mid June, and this was April. You know, and I was like, holy shit. So I went home. The paintings are 6 by 8.5 inches. Wow. They was small enough for me to get enough work into them, but you know, large enough for me to get enough work, but small enough for me to turn them out. But still, at that pace, you know, you were talking about doing like a card a day with no sleep for 3.5 months. And it just wasn't feasible because, you know, it's like you get sick, you have family obligations. It's, you know, so toward the end, I was doing maybe 2.5 to 3 cards a day.
Trying to keep up, right?
I was working around the clock on these things. I would work. I wouldn't have set hours. I would work 25 hours. I would sleep 4 hours. I'd go back and work another 12 hours. I'd sleep for 6 hours, and I did that for 3.5 months. You know, and I remember, and I would bring them in groups of 10, so I can vouch for them in groups of 10. And I'll never forget, I brought the cards in one time, and Bob Odieski said, "Wow, you really look awful." I had black under my eyes. I hadn't slept in like 3 days. Like, I got cards, you know,
right?
And then, you know, they were actually they were, from what I understood, they didn't think I would get the set done in time. And there's a reason. If you notice, remember the ads from back then, it said, they say a great artist puts his soul into his work. Well, we at Skybox, my name's nowhere on the advertising. And I never even noticed it until somebody pointed out to me, because they weren't sure I was going to finish the set, and they thought they would have to farm out cards to other people. You know, and it turned out, I told them, I said, you farm out 1 card to somebody else after the 3 months I just put in, I'll kill somebody. So I got the card, I got to set it on time. And the set came out, and it just, it changed my career overnight. It really did.
So what was your process on that? Would you do a pencil and then submit it to them and they would okay it, and then you would do, you know, go right to finishes? Are you doing it in batches like that?
I figured there were 100 cards. I was going to do them in blocks of 25. So I did 25 sketches, and I sent in for the first 25 cards. But when you do that, they forgot that apparently I had 3 months to paint this card set, and they came back with really minuscule changes on so many different things. You know, this needs more mole men. Could you move this guy's arm? Could you? And I was like, you know, if I have to keep resubmitting sketches, these paintings are never getting done. So I never did sketches after that. I did sketches for the first 25, and after that, I just went straight to paintings. and sent the painting. And
give you any changes after that?
No. They didn't change anything. You know, the one card that I did over was Sabretooth, because I didn't like I was really rushing it, and it didn't look the way I wanted it to. So I trashed that one myself and redid that card. But yeah, the last 75 cards, I just did paintings. There were no sketches, no approvals, no anything. And,
well, how would you work on a large group of paintings like that? Because I think that's probably an interesting point for some people. Because with comics, it's pretty straightforward. You pencil everything, you ink everything. But you know, if you're painting something, do you pencil them? Are you drawing it right on the card? Are you transferring from your sketch to the board? Are you gessoing all 25 surfaces? You got to prepare a lot of surfaces. So you do all your surfaces. You know, what was your process of baking your cake? You know,
well, because I was working in mixed media at the time, and it's one of the reasons I hate the comic book collections they did, because they blew the paintings up larger than the actual paintings, so you can see the colored pencil, and you could see they're really rough, they're really loose, because they were marker, they were colored pencil, they were gouache, they were acrylic, airbrush, and you know they were all kinds of good. And just so I can get anything that got the job done, I was using on those cards. And once I didn't have to submit sketches anymore, what I did was I had the list of characters, and as I had an idea for a character, I did that character. I didn't do them in any specific order. You know, it's like, you know, okay, there's the list, and I'm working on, say, the Lizard, and I realized I have an idea for the Kingpin. So the Kingpin was the next card that I did, you know. And I would jot out sketches for myself on tracing paper, and just like, you know, since they were small, it took 2 seconds to transfer the sketch down to the illustration board, and I would work from there, you know. But that was like, it was still because you had to conceive every piece, you had to paint every piece. 100 cards in 93 days was really 104 actually when you consider the chase cards, because they yeah.
Oh no, I was just going to say, JRD says, "Holy, well, they turned out amazing. So thank you, and I'm sorry."
Well, thank you. It's, you know, and I think all of us were really nervous about how those cards would be received, because at the same time that those cards are coming out, Death of Superman came out, and the Death of Superman cards came out right before the Marvel Masterpiece cards, and we were like, shit, you know, Death of Superman is going to take all the attention away from this card set. And once they hit, it just kind of took on a life of its own, you know, and overnight it changed my career.
You know, I'm really sure you probably still get a lot of, because I know I did multiple cards over the various versions of the set.
Right.
People still really love the art. Always they're asking me if I have any art left. People probably wanted to buy your originals right away. People
yeah, I still, to this day, I sign more of those cards, that first set, than anything else I've ever done. You know, I can't do a convention or an appearance without a couple hundreds of those cards showing up for me to sign. You know, people still get those things signed. And when I did the recent set, I did an updated set for Upper Deck back in 2016. And it's still, people still care about that first set. You know, that first set is still the set that apparently
12. And when you get those cards when you're 12,
yeah, and they were mass market. You know, they were everywhere. I mean, they sold 350,000 boxes of those cards.
Holy crap.
So they were everywhere. You know, and now it's changed. It's a very limited market now. It's a collector's market. But really, I mean, that those you couldn't spit without hitting somebody with those cards back then.
I wasn't in the business yet, but I was a huge fanboy right in that era. And I remember the cards, and I remember kind of like what you guys were saying, and Joe, about the beginning of the speculator thing was getting really heavy. And, you know, my buddies and I had enough money to go into the shop, and they would sell you a case of those cards.
Yeah.
You weren't in the CVS getting a couple of boosters. You'd buy the whole thing.
Yeah.
You know, just to, you know, clear them out and make a full set. And, you know, I think that was around the time people stopped just enjoying things just to enjoy them. People were getting things in mass.
Yeah, I mean, I was thrilled to have my stuff on trading cards, because I was a trading card kid when I was younger. Andy's Candy Store, which was a few blocks away from me, they had all the wax packs. You know, so everything from the Partridge Family to Dark Shadows to, you know, to Beneath the Planet of the Apes cards. I mean, if there was a card set, I collected the card set. you know.
Mhm.
I wish I had them all today, but yeah. So the idea of having trading cards out with your stuff on it was really kind of cool for me.
Yeah,
You know,
no.
and that's the fanboy in me, you know.
There's a couple of kind of end bookends to that. Our good buddy Mark Robinson says, "Wow, working on the Marvel cards like that. Does anything phase you after meeting that kind of deadline?"
I was younger back then. I couldn't do that today.
Yeah.
I know that after I finished the first set and they realized how popular that first set was, they offered me the second set.
Mhm.
They wanted me to do the second set, but the deadline was exactly the same as the first set, and I was like, "There's no way in the world that I can now hunker down again and spend another 3.5 months painting these paintings." It almost killed me the first time. So they had.
So you don't get rewarded for finishing that one. You don't get like, "Oh, great, Joe, you pulled this one in. We'll give you the next one." Right?
So they call you when you got another fire.
Yeah, well, they realize, holy shit, this is popular. Let's get another set out. And obviously, he did the first set. Let's get him to do it. But it wasn't like, okay, you have 6 months to do it. If I had 6 months, it would have been great. I would have taken it in a second. Yeah. But they gave me another 3 months to do another 100 paintings, and I was like, I can't do that. It was that exhausting, you know. So I had done 5 new pieces per book when they did the comic adaptations, with comic collections of them. And just so they wouldn't be selling the same stuff, they had me do 5 new cards, you know. And I painted them the same size as the trading cards and everything, and they published them in there. So they took those paintings and they put them into the second set. So I have like 15 or 16 pieces in the second set. And then they took 5 of them and they put them in the tin set and called them lost cards. So people think that they were done for the first set, but they really weren't. They were done for the books, and they stuck them in the tin set and called them lost cards. So that's my contribution to set 2. After that was just stuff I had done already. They popped into the card set.
And you were still thinking after that of mostly working for Marvel and not trying to.
Well, I was starting to get other stuff. I got the World Wrestling Federation contacted me, and that was based on a recommendation from Mary Wilshire, who I had never met. She was doing a lot of their pen and ink work for their catalogs, for the merchandising catalogs, and they needed somebody to do a color poster for the Royal Rumble that year, and she recommended me. So they contacted me, so I did the advertising for that, which led to WrestleMania 7 poster, which led to the Royal Rumble poster the next year, which led to their hockey game. You know, remember the hockey games, the table hockey games? Mm-hmm. I did the box art for that. So they were a great client, you know, and I did various other stuff. I did some advertising work. I did vitamin ads for a couple of supplement companies, you know, in muscle and fitness and stuff. But I stayed mostly. I liked comics. I felt secure there, you know, and I started to get more and more work. I started to get commissions, you know, because now I was a name, and you know, there's a lot more money in private commissions than there is in doing commercial stuff, you know, to be honest with you. So once I started getting commission money, and my originals were starting to sell, you know, for a decent amount of cash, so I was comfortable in comics, and I kind of stayed in comics.
Joe, was there a point during all of this, because you came in as a Marvel guy, really?
Right.
Did you see the benefit, especially in the 90s, of doing comic book conventions? Like, were you looking at it as a supplemental income of, you know, like signing stuff or selling? Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. I didn't go to Comic Cons when I was a kid. I found out after the fact that they had a couple, like the Phil Seuling cons and stuff like that. I didn't know anything about them, even though I was working at a comic store. Right. I didn't know about the Comic Cons, because the comic store wasn't really owned by guys who were comic guys. It was owned by a moving company, so they didn't know really anything about the industry.
Right.
So I had never gone to a con when I was younger, and
I find that sort of amazing, because that really shows you how different everything is. Is that you could be in New York City,
mm-hmm.
still, you know, in and trying to get in and knowing people, and still not know of like a Phil Seuling show.
And I was a maniacal comic fan. Yeah.
So you never saw a flyer or a poster or a...
Right. Yeah. I did right after I sold back in '79. I think I did a creation con. Somebody had said, well, you know, it's con this weekend, you know, they'll you get a table there and, you know, set stuff up. I did the creation con, and obviously I was new. No one knew who I was, you know, so it didn't do much for me. So I kind of turned me off. I was like, I don't see the point in doing a convention, you know, since no one knows who I am. And then years later, I guess around 90, 95, maybe, I did maybe 1 or 2 more in New York. After that, when Chaikin and Simonson had Upstart Studios, they mentioned there was a convention that weekend, so you should probably go to the why don't you come to the convention with us? I did the convention. Jeff Jones was there. I met Jeff for the first time, but I didn't see the purpose in doing them when I was younger. And then one year, Mitch Itkowitz, who was an art dealer, said to me, "Listen, San Diego is like the big con. You should come out to San Diego." And I had never been on a plane before, and I was like, "I don't know if I'm gonna, I gotta fly out to San Diego to do a Comic Con." He's like, "No, trust me, it's not what you think it is. It's an amazing convention." Mm-hmm. So I did my first San Diego con back, I guess, in 95, maybe, and then I did it for like 20 years straight after that, until they took away Artist Alley. And gave you half a table, and then I would go now if people invite me out there and I'm a guest of a company or something like that. But
so, Joe, was your mindset? And it's funny because Mike and I had a long conversation about this topic the other night. About, and this is more me coming from an indie side of getting into comics. Thinking months in ahead about going to a comic book convention and setting up and having all the exhibition stuff.
Right.
Versus how you guys really started, where you would go to a show to sign people's things.
Yeah.
Right. You weren't really set up to peddle wares. Like, were you bringing paintings to sell there?
I had originals. I had originals with me. Yeah, whatever I had done up to that point. I had some artwork, and I made a couple of small. It was like really early on. I made a couple of small prints of stuff that I had done. I found a printer in New York, and but for the most part, I sat there. I signed a couple things for people over the, and I think I might have sold one piece after the fact by some guy who saw it there and asked for my number and called me later on. But I spent more money at the con than I made, back then, basically,
Yeah, you were the guy that was never at his table.
Yeah. It's like, holy shit! Look at all of this stuff. Look, let me go through all the old Gold Key books. Because I'm a big Alberto Gialetti fan. So it's like, I would go through all the Gold Key stuff and anything that I saw that he did, because he did 1 million books that you'd never know he did. You can go through Have Gun Will Travel or Gunsmoke or the most ridiculous books.
Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea.
Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, and Twilight Zones, Boris Karloff. I mean, he was everywhere, and I was able to spot his work. So next to John Buscema, most people wouldn't realize this, but he's probably my biggest influence as far as doing backgrounds and landscapes and trees and rocks and stuff like that. I learned so much from him on how to compose like full scenes and settings and stuff like that.
Well, it's funny you say that, because he's a huge influence on Al Williamson.
Yes.
Al always said that he learned how to do rocks by looking at.
If you go through the Star Wars strip, you can see Gialetti swipes everywhere. Yeah. Trees and rocks and all kinds of stuff like that. Yeah, he was a big Gialetti fan.
Yeah. So I'm sort of interested too in your process as you're going along and you're working, but there's also that period of like where you're learning on the job, but you're also trying to learn. So did you have periods of self-study separate from working, like separate from, or were you just like so nose to the grindstone, you were just learning as you went along?
Yeah, I was just kind of learning as I went along. As I needed to learn stuff, I taught it to myself. Because I had a whole circle of friends outside of comics. So when I wasn't working, I was hanging out. I was a bar guy. I was hanging in bars. I was on dart teams. It's like we played city championship darts and stuff like that. So I had a life outside of comics, whereas a lot of comic guys, they all kind of unite. Like even when I was a cop, I didn't hang out with cops.
No?
I never. I had a couple of guys who were friends of mine. I didn't want to talk cop talk 24 hours a day. You know what I mean? It's like, it was my job. I went to work. I did the job. I took it very seriously. But once I was done, I didn't want to talk cop talk all night long. So I had my civilian friends. Civilian friends from comics, civilian friends from the job, and I liked it that way. It kind of kept me, I think, a little more balanced. To have different circles of friends.
Right. Yeah. No, I think even the older. The golden age guys, Bronze Age guys, were like that. Like,
Mhm.
you know, they didn't like Al and Frazetta and all those guys were friends back in the day. But a lot of the strip guys, you know, they went and played golf. They did all kinds of,
Yeah.
you know, they didn't spend all their time, probably like we did, or our generation was probably, or like Wrightson and guys like that,
Right.
that generation. They loved comics and they all sort of associated and hung out with each other and had studios and everything.
Right.
The previous guys were not quite as much like that.
Yeah, no, that is true. That's very, very true. Quick question: is it possible for me to take a quick break? I got to run.
Yeah, sure.
Right, just
Sure.
give me 1 second.
Sure, cool. We'll pull you off, and we'll take a pause for the cause. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with us tonight. This is Pencil to Pencil, a live fly on the wall podcast where spectacular comic book artists talk shop, and you get to listen and interact. Thanks for joining us. What do you guys think of the conversation so far? Joe's really fascinating. He's very, very easy to talk to, Mike. This makes it a lot easier for me too. We don't have to pull things out of him.
Yeah, we're pretty blessed with our guests not being the type of people that you
teeth pulls. Mm-hmm.
But again, it's not easy because a lot of artists are very interior people.
Mm-hmm.
You know, artists tend to be introverts.
Mm-hmm. That's super true.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think there's a particular type of artist or illustrator that I think we all kind of attract, and we could all really run our mouths on the phone if we get our druthers, But there are people who just can't do this, or like we talked about before, there's a lot of people who just couldn't say, yeah, I can do this, or they go, no, I can't do this. Thanks for asking, but I can't be on camera.
I've had 3 or 4 people in the last month turn me down, even though they like the podcast or they like me, but they're just too nervous to go on camera and to talk about their process.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. We're getting a lot of, and Joe's back. We're going to bring him in a second. But Michael says, this is my hands down favorite of your interviews. I'm loving this. Maybe this is the power of Wednesdays, Mike Manley. The JRD, yeah, great conversation so far. He can have as many comfort breaks as he wants if it means more talk. And my
like a Tonight Show, they have them during the break.
That's right. Yeah, we get a break. Suzanne Varingo says, hey there, Mike and Jamar. Hey, Suze. This is real comics. I find all these artists fascinating. Thank you so much, Suze. All right, let's bring Joe back in. Hey, Joe. How you feeling?
Hey, how you doing?
Good.
I was listening to you guys talk about being camera shy and stuff like that. And normally I'm not crazy about doing these things either because I know I talk really quickly. It's my New Yorker thing.
Yeah.
But I learned a long time ago. When I used to do panels when I first started doing cons, and I would have to do a panel. I was like, wait, what am I going to talk about on the panel? Who's going to want to hear from me? And then after a while, you kind of get used to you realize that people are there to sort of hear what you have to say, and it makes you a little less self-conscious. And there were a couple of times, there was one panel I was supposed to do, it was a panel on cover art. And there were like 6 other guys on the panel and nobody showed up but me. So I sat on,
wow.
because it's like guys just blow off panels all the time. And no one showed up, And so I sat there and I went, okay. I said, I just did a question and answer thing. I talked a little bit, did a question and answer thing for an hour, and it worked out really well. And that's when I kind of realized that, it's like, it's not as intimidating as you think it would be.
Yeah, they're really there to see you. And what's funny, when I do a little research for the shows. Just I look at other things on YouTube and see how people interact with the guests. Sometimes I've noticed probably the 5 or 6 interviews I watched featuring you usually at comic book conventions where somebody sticks a camera in your face. Right, those are always tough, right? Because I'm sure half of the time they don't really ask, or they may ask you and come back 20 minutes later.
Yeah.
And I've noticed that most of the people who interviewed you were so nervous. They were wrecking their own interviews.
Yeah. And And I don't get that because I don't see I don't see that I don't see me in that light. You know what I mean? It's like I still see myself as this 12-year-old kid who wants to do this for a living. You know, so I do the best I can to disarm them and stuff like that, and let them know that, you know, it's no big deal. You know.
Yeah. I say the same things to Mike. We have fights about that stuff all the time. But yeah, there was like one guy who was like visibly shaking.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. There was a guy that was actually physically shaking talking to one time, and I was just like, you know, I'm saying anything to him, stupid things, just to kind of to settle him down and make him laugh, and he just, man, nothing was working. Nothing was working. I was like, you know, but I guess you have to expect that sometimes.
Yeah,
it's flattering. It's flattering, but it's also unnerving for you because you realize how nervous this guy is, and you're spending more time trying to settle him down than actually answer the questions. You know?
Yeah. All right, let's get back.
We're at the comic artists are at the low end of celebrity. So imagine if you're like Tom Cruise or somebody, people are like totally freaking out when they see Harrison Ford, you know.
Hold on one second.
Going to the laundry, you know.
most fans are really, really cool, you know, and they're respectful, you know, of your time. My favorite story of all time. Did you ever hear the story about Neil Adams and the guy when he followed him to the bathroom to get a book signed?
No.
Oh yeah, it's apparently Neil went to the bathroom and he was in a stall and he heard a knock on the door. Or this is urban. I didn't hear this directly from Neil. I heard it from people who would know. And apparently the guy says, "Excuse me, Mr. Adams." And Neil went, "Yeah." And a book with a Sharpie on it got slid underneath the door of the stall. So that's never happened to me. You know?
Well, I know you have made it then.
Yeah, exactly.
Superstar level.
That's what you say. No, I don't need a marker. I got you.
Now, one of the things I wanted to ask you too is like, when you go through the trial by fire,
right?
sort
of perfect certain things you learn because you have trial and error. Because you just did, well, you're doing another series of Edgar Rice Burroughs paintings now. How would your technique have changed? I know, what was it, like a year or two ago, some of the golden acrylics or the acrylics you were using.
Yeah,
they discontinued.
The liquid text acrylics they discontinued. Yeah, certain colors that I really came to rely on. Not that you can't mix them yourself, but it's so much easier to have them accessible. And a couple of them were really difficult to actually mix. And you just kind of get used to your tools. Same thing has happened with brushes. They discontinued the brushes I've used for like 25 years.
Yeah.
You know, and trying to find brushes now that are comparable to the ones they discontinued, I'm having the hardest time. You know, because they either don't have the same body, or they don't have the same spring to them, or they don't hold as much paint. Traditional materials are really taking a hit. You know, I worked on Bainbridge board like most illustrators did from the 50s through the 80s. You know, all the old paperback guys like Bob and then Bob Larkin, we all worked on Bainbridge 80 board. They don't make it anymore. You know, you can't find double thick board. You can't find 30 by 40 board. So I had to switch over and try to find another board that didn't warp or bend and held the paint well. And it took a while, but I found the Crescent heavyweight watercolor board that works sort of the same way that the old double thick Bainbridge board did. But it took a lot of time. And when I was working on that second set of masterpiece cards that I did a couple of years ago, I did a couple of paintings. And I didn't use the board I was normally using. It was a different crescent board, different number crescent board. And the board just, it horseshoed. And I had two of these cards, these finished paintings, because what I would do is I would varnish them afterwards, you know, I started varnishing. Once I switched all to acrylics, I started varnishing the paintings to pop the colors and stuff because they scan better that way. And once I varnished them, they just horseshoed because they got wet. And I was like, God, what am I going to do with these things now?
Did you wet them on the other side to see if it would go back?
What I did was I wet them on the other side. I let the varnish dry completely. I completely drenched the other side of them. And I slowly flattened them out. And I just piled tons of books on top of them for days. And let them dry with like 50 pounds of weight on top of them. And they dried flat. But I was petrified. I really was. I was like, Jesus, these things, because they just curled into a horseshoe. You know, I was like, well, I don't know what I'm gonna do with these things. So you got to be really careful with the board and the boards that you use.
Well, I remember there was a time when you would get your stuff scanned and they would drum scan it. You'd have to be able to bend your art, or they'd peel it.
I did a Phantom painting for the Billy Zane Phantom movie. I did a Phantom painting for the card set, and I got it back with the top layer of the illustration board peeled off and just lightly taped back on to the backing support because they had to drum scan it. And that happened to me twice. There was another piece that came back that way that was drum scanned, which was, people today have no idea what a drum scan is, but that was, I mean, spend the money and shoot a transparency. You know, why are you drum scanning a piece of illustration board? Yeah, it was maddening. It really was.
Yeah. I mean, now, so how do you scan everything yourself?
I've been scanning this stuff for years. I just set up, but scanning. There's no replacement for actually shooting stuff. You know, I had stuff shot for years by professional art places that would shoot transparencies for me. Because you get true color that way. You don't pick up grain or imperfections in the painting. You know, the film is different from scanning. Scanning is way too harsh sometimes, and it shoots through certain colors and not other colors, and you have to spend so much time on Photoshop adjusting and trying to get it back to where it's supposed to be. So I finally set up a wall in my studio, and I got the lamps and stuff like that. And I just got a camera, and I'm gonna start shooting my own work again, and trying to get that quality of stuff again, because you can't find anybody who shoots artwork anymore because it's all digital now. Even if you take it to a place that shoots art, they have a giant scanner bed and they scan it. You know, nobody shoots it anymore.
Except for museums. Still.
Yeah, there are private guys you can hire to come and do it, but it costs a fortune. You know, where a transparency would cost you $60, you hire somebody to come. Obviously, it's going to be a few $100 to have a guy come and shoot your painting. You know,
I know people at school, at the academy, would often have. Well, they would have people come in for students once a year before the student show, and you'd have a day where you could put your stuff up. There was a person who she's since retired who worked in their archives, and she would shoot everything. And then my old teacher Scott, I remember a couple times seeing somebody come in and shooting his stuff because he does stuff in pastel. You have to shoot it. You can't scan it. You can't turn it upside down on a glass and scan stuff. So with comics, it's easy. But when you, like you said, there were certain colors that, depending upon the software of the scanner, it turns certain colors like fugitives, like weird yellows are bad.
Yeah, I've got an Epson 10,000 XL, and it's a great scanner. It's 11x17, great scanner. And if I have a big painting, I'll scan it in 4 pieces and you piece it together in Photoshop. You know, the automate photo merge thing, which it's really, it doesn't take long at all. But you have problems then with the scanning, because a lot of times with the automatic exposure adjustment, if you have a really light spot in one painting and a dark spot in another painting, you're scanning it in pieces, it's going to adjust for what you're shooting, and then you piece it together and you have lines and separation lines and everything. So I've learned that you have to, if I have that kind of a grade in a painting, I have to shoot grades, trying to trick the scanner. I do sections at a time to trick the scanner into that smooth grade, instead of just doing the harsh like the dark, because it doesn't read it properly. You know, it's a bit of a pain. You know, and I've been doing that. I've gotten really good at it, because when I lived in Pittsburgh, I had a guy there who shot the artwork. This guy was great. I loved him. But then when I met my wife and I moved to Syracuse, there was nobody here doing that. So I had to learn to scan my own stuff. You know, and like I said, I've gotten pretty good at it. I've learned the tricks of using the scanner, but I really want to start shooting this stuff again, because you just get better quality reproductions.
So, Joe, I have some tech questions.
Sure.
And it's funny, the chat room is like, he keeps answering the questions I haven't asked yet. So this is a very thorough interview. But I want to talk about this kind of like your digital studio rig. Like, are you doing a lot of things on the computer these days? Do you paint digitally at all, or do you have any thoughts about that process?
I like getting my hands dirty. I like the tactile feel of actually painting something. You know, it's the way I grew up. It's the way I learned. I like having a physical piece of artwork when it's over, you know, as sort of evidence of what I did, you know. So I can scan stuff into Photoshop. I can clean stuff up if I have to, but I have a basic, you know, I have a trackpad. I don't do any painting in digitally at all, you know. Mainly because a good source of my income are originals, you know. So if I don't have originals, I'm really compromising.
And with the kind of the advances in technology, I know there's a lot of maybe young artists who can't tell the difference between a physical painted piece and a digital. Can you see that automatically, the things in print?
Pretty much. There are a few guys who could fool you. Justin Sweet is a guy who has a digital technique that looks like an oil painting. You know, now that I know a lot of his digital, I can spot it. But early on, I thought they were all oil paintings. I really did. You know, but it's the problem I have with digital painting is you could only differentiate it so much from what somebody else did. I got an annual a couple of years ago of fantasy art, and it's all digital stuff. It's like I don't know, it's like 300 pages. And by the time I got to page 50, I was starting to go back to see if the guy who did this piece had done the piece I saw on page 14. You know, they were different guys, but it looked exactly alike. You know, and I took the industry a while to catch up with the idea that guys who hand paint stuff, you're getting a pure vision of what that guy is doing with his own hands. So a San Julian piece is never going to be mistaken for a Michael Whalen piece, will never be mistaken for a Rosetta piece, will never be mistaken for one of my pieces. You know, there's a unique quality to hand painted art that you're not going to get digitally, at least not yet. You know, and that was the one problem I had going through that annual, was that after a while it all kind of started to look the same.
Yeah, and it also sort of feels like it was art directed by the same person. Yeah.
And like I said, the tools can only do so much, you know, and guys make their own brushes and they do this, but it still has that feel of being maybe a little too perfect, a little too well rendered. You know, it's like I kind of like imperfections in paintings. You know, I want a painting to look like a painting. And that's why I'm such a big, huge San Julian fan, because he just chunks that paint on. If you ever see a San Julian original, those paintings have such depth to the application of the paint. You know, I've got a couple of big Vampirella paintings hanging in my hallway outside the studio, and I can stare at those things for hours and just look at the paint application, which is something you'll never get from either a print piece or a digital piece. You know?
Right. And one of the other things I wanted to talk to you about was using models, and how you go about using models, how you about getting your swipe, because one of the things in comics is that you have to work pretty fast.
Yeah.
You know, so I know back in the day, guys like Larkin and people were in the city, they probably had like Steve Holland.
Steve Holland was the guy back then. Yeah.
Yeah. And did you ever get to work with Steve Holland?
I never did. No. I didn't know how to do that back then. And, you know, it's like, I know Bob used him for everything. He used Bomber used him for the Doc Savage books, and then Larkin used him for the Doc Savage books. Every Conan cover is Steve Holland. You know, Steve is basically everybody. And he's been on a billion paperback covers.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody used Steve Holland because he was an actor, and he knew how to act out the poses that these guys needed for their paperback reference. You know, and
sometimes he was everybody in the painting.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I posted one on my Facebook a little while ago, and he's like the good guy and like all five of the bad guys.
Right. There's a Larkin painting that of a Jackie Chan piece or a kung fu piece, and Larry Hama is every bad guy in the painting. You know, it's pretty funny. It really is.
So how did you go about getting models and
you know, it's I took lots of life drawing classes over the years. That was the only instruction I ever did take. You know, I kind of learned how to draw, and plus I had a comic book background, which helps, where I had learned how to draw out of my head. So what I did was I learned the value of a photo morgue and a swipe file from Chaykin when I was working for him, because he had a huge, as most illustrators up through history have had. You know, to this day, there isn't a magazine that goes through my hands that I don't take a razor blade to. You know, and I've got I have folders on castles, on campfires, on you know, on rivers, on, you know, you name it. You know, I've got hands, feet. You know, so I've got reference files on really basically everything I would ever need, that I would think I would need for what I do, you know, my specialty.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll draw the stuff out myself. I'll shoot reference photos. I never really hired professional models. I had friends that would pose for me and stuff like that if I needed stuff. But I've learned to fake a lot of stuff. You know, I'll draw the stuff out myself. And if I need reference to how for anatomy, I'll go through my files and I'll try to cobble stuff together that kind of matches what I already drew. But I found that if you pose people, you kind of lose the dynamic that we want in what we do. You know, and one of the things that Frazetta liked about my stuff when I talked to Frazetta was that my stuff moved. You know,
right.
it didn't look posed, and that was his thing. His thing was all about movement and action, stuff like that. And then Steranko had asked me one time, you know, so do you act out the pieces you do? Because he saw the movement and the stuff, and I think that's really important. And you can always tell when you've got somebody like leaning against the chair, you know, and that person is then painted into a painting and is supposed to be fighting somebody, but you could see the chair. It's not there, but you could see the chair, you know. So so I like to draw everything out first and then cobble stuff together if I need to, or shoot reference. My wife posed for some of the Tarzan paintings.
Tarzan.
Yeah, I know. She's very versatile. And then there's one painting of Tarzan. He's being carried by an elephant, and he's breaking through this giant facade, and a bunch of native guys are down there. And my son is every native guy in that painting. You know, just because you shoot him for lighting, you know, and stuff like that. But the figures are drawn myself to get the movement into them. So I like a combination of stuff. I try not to shoot stuff and then paint it, you know, because I think that kind of kills the painting.
Joe, I have a couple of questions about your Burroughs work. Ed Cato, who I'm a big fan of,
it's a great guy,
has a question for you. Fascinated by the Edgar Rice Burroughs covers you're doing now. What's the process of that like?
Well, when I decided to do these, I wanted to take an approach that I think hadn't been done with the properties for a while, if ever. And I wanted to do like a men's adventure type approach to these because it really suits the books. It suits the subject matter. Mm-hmm. So I didn't want to do staid, sort of like posed figure pieces. I wanted to do action shots, which again is, you know, the stuff I grew up on. You know, that's my comic book background coming back into this again. So I try to pick a scene that I think is going to be the most attention getting for the book. And I'm not painting these for people who already know the stories. I'm painting the covers for people who don't know the stories. You know, that you're trying to get new readers to these because you know the people who know these books are going to buy them anyway. But my job is to get new people to buy them. So even though some of the scenes that I've done for the covers are scenes that have been done by other people, it is the key scene of the book. I just have to find a new way to interpret that scene for the cover. Like I just finished Tarzan at the Earth's Core. It's the shot of him being carried by the giant pterodactyl to the nest, and everyone and their mother has done that scene. So, but it's the key scene that differentiates it from every other Tarzan novel. You know, it's like it tells you that he's not in the jungle with this. There are dinosaurs in this thing. It's a great and it makes you go, whoa, what's this book about? Right. So my challenge with that piece was to come up with a whole new sort of way of depicting that scene.
And how hard is that? Because I mean, there's sometimes, you know, we all have our favorites of guys like Frazetta or whoever, and you go like, that's so good. Like how do I get something that is that? Because like that's like the best idea. So I have to try to come up with another idea where you know what I mean?
Well, that's my favorite of Neil's covers is Tarzan at the Earth's Core. I love that painting he did. And I had done that scene for the trading card set that I did back in 1995. I'd done the exact same scene, but I wanted to do the scene again, but I wanted to do my own take on it. So I decided I said, well, no one's ever done. I've got tons of reference books. I have all the history of Burroughs art and stuff like that. And I go through them to make sure I'm not doing what somebody else has done before. You know, if I have an idea, once I get the idea, I'll go and check and make sure it's not derivative. Not the scene, obviously, but the composition or the idea. And once I see that it's not derivative of something somebody else has done, I'm a little more comfortable and I can kind of flesh out that idea. And I really like the idea I have it this morning because it's a down shot coming from behind the the pterodactyl, and you could see the nest at the bottom. And the thing that almost nobody's ever done, except for Neil, really, when I think about the cover, is that Pellucidar, where this takes place, is the center of the earth. So it's a hollowed out land where there's nothing but horizon line everywhere. There's nothing but land. There's no horizon. There's no sky, because you're inside. Picture being inside a Spalding, So wherever you look, it's very disorienting, and there would be land everywhere. Even if you look straight up, there's land. Yeah,
right, yeah.
So I wanted to get that effect into the painting. So and so that's basically how I'm approaching these. I'm doing these where I'm trying to get people to look at these covers and go, I want to buy that book, which is the job of every cover artist. That is your job. Mm-hmm. So I'm not, like I said, I'm not painting these for the guys who know the stories already. I'm painting these for people who don't, and trying to draw them in. So that's my entire approach. And I'm trying to.
You must have a big base though of people that love that. Love that stuff, because they do whatever 15, 20 years they do another round, because they did, Frazetta did his, and Krinkle, and then they had Jeff Jones did a bunch, right? And then
well, it's funny with the Tarzan and John Carter books though. They haven't been re-released with new covers since the Whale and Adams and Boris stuff in the 70s.
Wow.
I mean, they've done a book here and a book there, but they haven't released the series in 40 years with new cover art. And my whole thing to do these was, I said, when no one's ever done every single book. You've had like guys that the Mars books, guys that the Tarzan books, but no one's ever done every single book Burroughs ever did. So why don't we do a unified library with the same cover artist on every single book, which was kind of self-serving on my part. But I just, because I love the subject matter, and I really thought that I'm at a point in my career with what I know that I can actually do justice to the properties. I've always wanted to do these. From the time I saw those Adams books, I said to myself, how do you get that job? When you're like 17 and those books come out and you want to do this for a living, you look at something like that and you go, how do you get to a point in your career where you get that job?
Right.
And that was my goal when I started, was to get to a point where hopefully I'd be in this business long enough where I would warrant getting an assignment like that.
Yeah. And one of the interesting things about the time too is that you would have Neil doing stuff, you would have Frazetta doing stuff, you'd have Boris doing, and they're all doing it at the same time. So they're like kind of challenging each other a little bit.
Yeah. And it's funny. It's like, when I finally got the okay to go ahead with this, I was thrilled, because really, and I'm glad I got it when I got it, because if I had even gotten this assignment 5 years ago, I don't think I would have been ready for it, because I'm a better painter now than I was 5 years ago. And I think I'm at a point in my career and where I can really do what I need to do with these covers. But as thrilled as I was when I first got them, I got the sketches done for the first like half a dozen covers, and I was getting set to paint Tarzan of the DX, which was the first book. And I suddenly started to freak, because I realized, it's finally hit me, who I was following. All the guys that came before me. I'm following Frazetta, I'm following Whale, and I'm following Boris. I'm following Neil. And I was like, holy shit, and I started to freak out a little bit, and freeze up. And I talked to Chaykin about it. I just said, I'm really I'm psyching myself out and getting inside my own head before I even start the first cover. And he basically said, look, he goes, you're the perfect guy for this assignment. It's what you've always wanted to do. He goes, just jump in and do it. He goes, you got to, and think of it this way. You're going to be doing 80 paintings. They're not all going to be masterpieces. Some are going to be great. Some are going to be really good. Some not so good. But that's the deal when you're doing a large volume of work like that. And once I thought of it that way, I was kind of like, all right, well, let me go into the first one. And then you think about, it's a property that's loved, and fans are incredibly attached to this stuff. And they're not kind when they don't like what you're doing.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean?
And now they can tell you, JOE JUSKO.
Exactly.
And also with this one, you don't have to do it in 3 months.
Yes. So that was the other thing, is I wanted to make sure that I did justice to the stuff that the people who were going to be really scrutinizing this stuff would think. And after the first few books, and I saw reaction to the paintings from people who took this stuff really seriously, I start to feel a lot more comfortable, and I'm sort of in my zone now with these.
Joe, there's a few more ERB
Sure.
questions. You've kind of sparked a flame here in the chat room. So one of our good buddies, Eternity Forever, who's checking in from YouTube, asks, do you have to get the okay from the Burroughs estate as an artist? If they don't like your style of art, would they say, no, not him?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I discussed this job actually with ERB Inc. for years. I've got a really good relationship with them. I have since I did the cards back in '95, and they knew I wanted to do this job, and they're fans of my stuff. So when it came time to do, they decided to pull the trigger on doing this authorized library. They contacted me to see if I was still interested in doing it. Mm-hmm. So we have a really good relationship. They trust me to know the properties and do justice by them, and I trust them because they're actually giving me a lot of leeway to handle these the way I want to, because they trust me. Mm-hmm. So I'm not going through rounds of art direction. They're not heavily art directed at all, which gives me the freedom and the confidence to do what I need to do with these paintings. So it's been a great working relationship, one of the best I've ever had, actually.
And I'm sure that's another case of you being in the system so long and people knowing your work to that degree where these things happen because of you, not like you were chasing that down.
Yeah, I think if you hire me at this point, you know what you're going to get. Yeah. You know, I wish I had the courage to change up techniques the way guys did in the 60s. You know, like, Mitchell Hooks was a guy who had 47 different approaches to doing a paperback cover, and I still don't know how you hire Mitchell Hooks and you don't know what you're going to get. You know what I mean? It's like, did you hire him because you like that cover, or did you hire him just, or were the art directors more heavily involved back then, saying we kind of want this, or we want that? I don't know, but I know that the guys who would switch up their approaches and their techniques back then fascinated me, because it's how'd you know what you're going to get, But I've kind of kept the same approach over the years, and I've worked at trying to master and perfect my approach to what I do. It's not as tight as it used to be. I've loosened up. I've got a little more painterly and a little more confident in my materials than I was years ago. My color sense is different than it was when I first started. Since I was teaching myself how to paint. If you look at my early Marvel stuff, it's very comic booky in coloring. The colors are very intense, and for numerous reasons. Back then, printing was horrible, so you painted for reproduction. So you had to pump stuff up so it reproduced remotely to like what you painted, but that can screw with your approach to color. So I had to learn to back off from that. But I just spent more time kind of perfecting what I do and what I know how to do with it rather than switching it up.
All right, here's the next one. They're coming hot and heavy. So our good buddy Phil Allura, who was on for 2 episodes just recently, hey Phil, asks, what is the process timeline for each cover between the estate, your editor, the AD, to final delivery of the cover painting? So maybe you go through the channels you have to get approval from?
Yeah, it varies. I mean, as far with the Tarzan pieces, they're not really pegged me to a schedule because they're self-publishing the books. So it's not like I'm working for a giant corporation who has a deadline schedule or release date. They're being content to let me do the best work I can and letting me take as much time as I need to do it, which often isn't the best thing to do with an artist, is to give them an open-ended deadline. But I'm being a bit more diligent than I would have been when I was younger. Mm-hmm. I remember Top Cow made the mistake of giving me an open-ended deadline on the Tomb Raider book that I did, and they waited 5 years for it. It's the best thing. I still think it's one of the best things I've ever done. I wouldn't change a single thing about that book, but it was not a comic book. It was a vanity project eventually, and I painted myself into a corner after the first few pages where I just had to maintain that level of consistency and quality, and it just took forever. It really did. Yeah. But getting back to Burroughs, so they told me they want the best work that I can give them. They know that that's going to take a little bit of time for each cover. I'm doing sketches for the pieces in like blocks of 4 or 6 and sending them into them, just to show them where I'm going, and then I'll do the paintings. The paintings take anywhere from 3 weeks to a month because I'm painting larger than I normally work. I'm painting 20 by 30 because I want to make sure I have room to get all the work into them. I'd say start to finish from any piece, from concept to finish, is maybe 4 to 5 weeks. Because I'm really taking my time.
Are you working on more than one at the time?
I can't do that. No, I get confused if I do that. I do one start to finish and I move on to the next
all
one.
the way.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking about the next one, because what I do is I print out the sketches and I have them on my drafting table as I'm working on the piece I'm working on, and I'll constantly be looking at the ones, going through my head, figuring out how I'm going to approach the next cover. So I'm 3 or 4 covers ahead in my head, but I work on one to completion at a time.
No, I remember we were talking a little bit before. You say, now, are you not doing color comps even for yourself? Are you just winging it?
On a couple of pieces, I did color comps because I wanted to try something different with the color, and I wasn't sure if it would work. So I print out a small version of the cover, and I would just do like really loose color blocking in to see if the colors would work together. But I kind of like I find if I do a really tight comp before I do the painting, that by the time I get to the painting, I've done it already, and my enthusiasm is kind of gone. Again, going back to my short attention span, I kind of like the painting to evolve on the board. Sometimes that makes it take a little bit longer because I paint myself into a corner and I got to stop and figure out where to go from what I've done already. But I find it more invigorating to do that way. I like to problem solve on the board.
Now, have you started out, thought you were going to do something, totally screwed it up and go, shit, I got to start again? No, I haven't restarted the painting probably since that Sabretooth card back then. Wow.
I kind of see where I'm going, because when I sketch them out, I sketch them out with color in mind. I'm thinking color as I'm doing the sketches. Even though I'm not doing color sketches, I'm thinking color, and I'm thinking about what I'm going to do. And then a lot of times I may vacillate before, because I work from the background forward on a painting. The figure is normally the last thing I paint, because I find it easier to paint a figure into a background and light it to a background than the other way around. There are guys who'll paint the figure first and they'll paint the background all around it, but how do you know what the lighting is going to be in the background when you're painting the figure? Because now you're locked into how you painted that figure, and you have to paint the background to match it. I find it easier to work the other way around. I think Greg Hildebrandt works the same way, where he'll paint the setting first and paint the figure into the setting.
And logically, if you think about it, the figure is an object within the atmosphere of that background. So if you the local colors are affected by the spectrum that you're painting. Exactly.
So I found that for me, once I figure out the background color of a painting, I play everything else off that background color painting forward. I have a general concept, a color concept in mind. It may change slightly as I go along. Like something in the foreground might not be exactly the color I planned initially because it doesn't work with the background color that I chose. But I find that if I do that, if I get that first color down and work my way forward, I can make it all work together. And it's just the way I've chosen to work for myself. I wouldn't recommend it for people, to work that way if you haven't trained yourself to do it. But for me, I find it works better to keep my interest up, and it doesn't lock me into a preset color palette.
Oh, sorry, Joe. So
yeah.
Just to maybe answer some of Phil's questions, are you getting a lot of notes from editorial or the AD, or are they just kind of letting you rock until you're finished?
I pretty much have carte blanche and artistic freedom on these covers, which I think is great, which shows the trust they have in me to know both the material and to hand in quality pieces. That they're not dictating palettes or color schemes. I'm not sending them process shots as I'm working on stuff. You know what I mean? It's like they approve the sketch.
That's the worst, when you've got to like even sometimes if you do a commission of fan, can you show me a process shot?
I won't do it. Yeah. No. I'm not showing you the painting half done, because that's happened. I've learned. I thought, I don't really like that. Hey, that's not really working for me.
Yeah, I have a friend that's a very good, very, very good top portrait painter, and he would go do a painting of Doctor, or what I call like the Children of the Corn painting, where a lot of folks down south who have a painting of their little tow-haired grandchildren. It's still, he could do that.
Right.
And so what he would do is he would do a comp. He would do sketches and he'd take photos, and he would do a comp, and he would show the family the comp. But of course, the comp is not the finish.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And they would look at it and go, "This looks kind of rough."
You open the door. Yeah.
So what he started doing was, because he's a very photorealistic painter, is he would take the several photos, combine them in Photoshop, put a filter on it, show that to the people, and they go, "Oh!"
Really? Okay.
It wasn't going to be that far off in
Right.
a way from what he was doing.
Right.
That worked because you were showing a sketch to people who didn't have the visual imagination to
Right.
realize this is a sketch. This is
Right.
not. This is just to give you an idea.
Yeah. It's not it's not a polished finished painting. It's basically a color block in to show you where I'm going to go with the painting.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Right.
And so he
Yeah.
found that if he did that,
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Last ERB question that I have right now.
Okay.
So Dre Studios, who said before, if you hire Joe, you're getting 24 karat gold, baby. Dre Studios
Thank you.
From YouTube says, will the Burroughs art ever be available in a book similar to the Marvel masterpieces?
Yes, I definitely have a book planned with all the prelims and some step by steps and a whole bunch of stuff. It's going to take a while because there are 80 books altogether to get to. But yes, I definitely want to do a giant book collection of all of the art once it's
so you're
done.
saying what, like 2 months?
Yeah. Hello, Marvel.
One of the things I remember, I don't know if you know Charles Santori,
Sure.
illustrator, right? And we saw an exhibition of his work, and he said something very interesting that ties into what you were saying earlier. So his work is very realistic.
Mm.
But what he does is he does his sketches, and then he gets reference, and he puts his reference on top of his sketches, as opposed to going to the zoo, painting a sleeping lion,
Right.
and then tracing the sleeping, like a lot of people. So he's never limited by his scrap, by his reference. And then the work has more of a personality in it.
Mm, yeah, exactly. That was the point I was making earlier. If you draw the stuff out first to get the personality and the movement and the attitude into what you're doing, then you use the photo ref to perfect it and to make sure it's accurate. That you get a better piece out of it. You really do. And I found that's worked for me. But that, again, that's the comic book background. As you know, it's the kind of stuff we have to know how to do. So I think the benefit I had of going into painting after wanting to be a comic book artist is the fact that I maintained that sort of dynamic, and especially considering the fact that guys like John Buscema, John Buscema was my idol from the time I was a kid. So, and there's still so much of him in my work because I learned how to pose figures and how to do movement from John, and if you see my sketches and my pencils and my layouts, there's a lot of Buscema in them. I lose it when I paint, but that basic attitude of composing figures and moving figures, I've never lost that. That's been ingrained in me from the time I was 8 years old.
And I think the older generation of the pulp artists really got that because they did work so fast.
Yeah.
So you didn't always get a chance to really, you were shooting a bad Polaroid or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
You were not able to go later on, Obama and guys like that, the ad agencies, or you would have time to pose your model and take several different kinds of exposures to get different kinds of detail.
Yeah.
Like Rockwell did. He had a professional photographer to give him exactly what he needed to transfer to his work later.
Well, the paperback publishers years ago, that was part of that was built into your rate. They would actually pay for your modeling sessions. So the guys who were using Steve Holland weren't paying Steve Holland. They weren't paying for that. It was, if you did romance covers, you were expected to use models. So if you were posing Fabio for a romance cover, the paperback company was paying for that modeling session. To get you the ref that you needed to do the painting. That's gone forever now. But most people don't realize that expense was covered by the publisher.
Did you ever want to paint a Fabio painting?
Why? I can just look in the mirror and just do a self-portrait and there you are.
Joe, there's a couple more questions that I may call this the lightning round because I want to start wrapping you up.
Okay.
And we've had a fascinating time just chopping it up, as the kids say, with you. So this has been great.
Am I starting to bore you?
No.
I'm kidding.
No, never. We could go for 4 hours, but I don't want to do that. There was a question. Everybody's really they're a titter over talking about this Burroughs stuff. And do you take commissions? Can somebody hire you to do a painting?
I take commissions. I have a bunch that are backlogged right now that I really have to get to.
Yeah.
Because the Burroughs job is taking up so much of my time.
Yeah.
So once I clear out the commissions that I do have backlogged, I'm definitely open because I enjoy that. I like the freedom of doing commissions. You know, it's one of the reasons I'm enjoying the Burroughs job so much is because they're almost like doing commissions because they give me that much freedom to work on them.
Mhm.
But yeah, I definitely am available. Just right now, I have to say no only because I'm so backed up.
I'd love to talk about commissions for a quick second because,
Sure.
People like yourself who are at such a high level of the craft, how do you deal with, or do you have people that come up to you once in a while and say, hey, listen, Joe, I'd love for you to do this thing for me. And then they get your rate. And then do they just like melt into the floor after that?
People at conventions, they know. They know. Fans know what stuff costs. Comic art fans has been a boon to let people know what stuff costs. Facebook with the different original art collector sites and stuff like that. People they know what to expect when stuff gets done. Civilians, on the other hand, family members, it's like I'd like really so that's what you do. I'd like you to do a painting of my wife and my kid and my 2 kids, for my wife for her birthday. And I'm not the guy who comes to your kid's party to do something, and you tell them that you get what you get, and they look at you like you're insane.
Yeah, they
do because they don't get it. So I've had that. Yeah, I avoid those conversations as much as possible. But yeah, I think we've all had that conversation with somebody who thinks it's like a couple $100 if you're like the guy on the boardwalk who does the pastel portraits.
Right.
Speaking of which, there was a guy years ago. I'll never forget this guy, Washington Square Park in New York City, when they used to have all the guys out, doing like drawings and stuff. Like they were all along 6th Avenue.
Yeah. And
there was a guy. I was maybe 20, 21, and this is back when TV Guide had Bob Peak and Amzell and Charles Santora and all these guys and Bernie Fuchs and everybody doing TV Guide covers.
Yeah.
I've got folders full of that stuff because I was cutting them up since I was a kid. And there was a guy who had a stand and he did celebrity portraits and stuff. And this guy was as good as anything I ever saw in Time Magazine or TV Guide. And I was like, why aren't you? And he's like, yeah, I like doing this. It's like, it's a guy who probably couldn't perform commercially, Yeah. But I was dumbfounded. I mean, he was brilliant, brilliant. And they weren't like the typical pastel stuff. They were just really like movie poster type stuff.
Wow.
And he liked just doing stuff on the street.
Probably didn't have the personality to be successful, which is something that people don't often talk about. We talk about technique and all these other things, but you also have to have the kind of personality when you're working in commercial art that allows you to be successul. Are you easy to get along with? Can you make the changes?
Right.
You know, and that's something that you learn on the job. But you see the people that get kind of like shot down and don't make it, but that's something that especially younger people have to develop, that idea that you have to have the right type of personality, especially back in the day, because if you were an asshole, you were done.
Right. And it goes into the mindset too. It takes a lot of sacrifice to do what we do. It takes a lot of time. There are guys who I remember early on, I didn't have a lot of money, but if I saw an art book that I wanted, I bought the art book. Instead of going to the bar, I bought the art book. It's like you sit there and you go, well, this is a night at the bar, or this $50 Andrew Loomis book. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, I bought the Andrew Loomis book. Yeah. It's like you do what you need to do to get better. It all depends on how seriously you take what you do, And early on, every one of us, had to make those sacrifices and those decisions as to what we were going to spend our money on. And I spent it on the stuff I needed to get better at my craft.
And now you could go get it for free as a PDF on the internet and drink yourself under the table.
I got to tell you, I was so pissed because I spent so much money on those Loomis books.
Me too.
I spent so much money on them. Yeah.
It took years to find them all.
And they were hundreds of dollars a piece, when you finally found them. And then they showed up on the internet and then they re-released them all. It's like, oh man, you gotta be kidding. But at the time, you couldn't find them. And
famous artist books?
I'm sorry?
The famous artist books?
Yeah, oh yeah. Well, I got lucky with those. I was at Powell's Books in Portland.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's like the Strand.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in there one day years ago. I did a small show out there with Alex Ross and Charles Vess and a couple other guys, and we went to Powell's. And I found one binder on the shelf for like $15. I was like, wow, it's $15. Then I looked over, and there was another binder over here. And I said, okay, I found two of the binders from this set. The third one's got to be here somewhere. Nobody bought just one binder. And on a shelf up there, I found the third one. So for $45, I got the entire famous artist course. And then since then, somebody gave me a set. So I've got like 3 or 4 sets from different years because the artists changed out.
Right.
But yeah, that first set I found in Powell's for $15 a binder.
Do you
believe it?
So if you could pick like 3 or 4 books that you would recommend today to people coming along that you still think you learned, that you got the most out of? Because like some books you get, like the Fritz Willis books when you're 15, but then maybe you don't stick with that kind of a thing, But then there's other books that you can go back to. Like I found, like I have had creative illustration for 20 years.
It's a brilliant book.
But when I went back to school for painting, I got a lot more out of that book because then he was talking about how Eakins painted, the direction that Eakins painted versus the direction that Sargent painted, which is something that initially just went straight over my head.
Yeah, sure.
Mm-hmm.
The Loomis books, a lot of people look at them as being dated because of the style of the drawings and the hairstyles and everything. The Loomis books, any Loomis book really is going to be a benefit to you. It really is. For comic artists, a book that I recommend to everybody that you can get for $15 is Drawing the Head and Hands by Jack Ham.
Yeah.
That book is brilliant.
Yeah,
it really is. It doesn't
weird angles, hard angles.
Yeah, and again, it shows you the points and the proportions of everything and relation to everything else, and it's drawn in line like comic books are drawn. That book is spectacular. I mean, that's never far away from my drawing table. I love that book. So, and he has one on animals too, which isn't quite as good, but the drawing the head and figure by Jack Ham is I recommend that to everybody who comes to my table if they want to draw comics. The Hogarth books I think are useless. I don't recommend this. I don't recommend this to anybody.
He gets constantly burned at the pit on our podcast all the time. Yeah.
I have some people that reach out to me like, "What happened? What did Hogarth ever do to you?" I'm like,
it's just I love the Tarzan strip. I think the Sunday pages are brilliant because he wasn't quite as stylized at that point as he got later on in life when he did those art instruction books. But man, I mean, his anatomy,
it's crazy.
He makes it up. It's not accurate, So if you want to learn how to draw, man, the last thing you got to do is look at the Hogarth book. Really, So I steer people away from those constantly. Because I love the Loomis books. I picked up a book last week that I had never heard of before. You know who Roland Wilson is? Mm-hmm. Right? Roland Wilson did an entire book. It's like this thick on illustration and color and process and I bought this thing I got it a couple of weeks ago and I've been going through it. I'm like, oh my God, there was so much knowledge in this.
Yeah, Brett just showed that to me last week. He got a copy of it.
Oh my God. I mean, the book is incredible. It really is. The whole section on color and then application of the color and compositions. It's made for animators, but it really does work for anybody who's doing single piece illustrations.
Right.
Also, as far as how to compose something color and value wise.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a lot more advanced. It's not a beginner's book at all. I don't know. Off the top of my head, it's kind of hard to pick a few other books. There's a book by an Italian guy. I can't remember his name. He did a series of drawing books, figure drawing books. He did one on the female figure, one on the male figure. I can't remember his name. I could see the books from here, but I can't think of his name offhand. There are a bunch. It depends on what you want to study. You know, I buy books on everything. I bought books on my wildlife art books. You know, every wildlife artist who's ever put out an instruction book, I bought those. You know,
like Bob Kuhn and
Bob Kuhn, John Siri Lester. John Siri Lester, I found amazing, and he did a series of instructional videotapes years ago. He did a 12-part acrylic set and a 12-part oil set.
Wow,
that covers everything how he approaches and how he paints everything he paints. And holy shit, they're brilliant. They really are. You know, so I would definitely recommend those to anybody who wants to paint wildlife art, because he's a master at storytelling in the painting, also not just painting like a cat. He tells stories with the art, you know, and I find his work fascinating. He passed away, I don't know, about 6 months ago.
But he go to the New York Zoo and do animal drawing at all or anything like that?
Not really. No, I'm not one of those guys who walks around with a sketchbook. You know, I know there are guys who keep sketchbooks and they have volumes and volumes of stuff that they do. I've never kept a sketchbook. You know, it's because like we talked about earlier, it's like when I'm not working, I don't want to work. You know, I don't want to talk comic books. I don't want to work. I don't want to. You know, it's just.
But your mind must always be on. I mean, you must be able to remember all kinds of crazy characters from when you were a cop.
I can't watch a movie without missing half the dialogue because I'm analyzing how stuff is lit and how stuff is composed. Right. That's one of the reasons I love old movies, because old movies are different from movies that are made today, and they're composed differently. So I'll sit there through any 40 or 50s film noir flick or drama, even melodrama, and just look at the way stuff is lit and the way stuff is composed. And you learn to retain that stuff. You get that hidden Rolodex in your head that retains what something looks like, you know, textures or lighting or something like that.
So you would say memory is a big part of your process.
I think being able to see stuff instead of looking at it is important, and you either have that or you train yourself to do that. You know what I mean? Everybody looks at everything, but how often do you actually see what you're looking at? You know, and retain it.
The old famous artist axiom C: observe, remember. Basically,
yeah, that's exactly true. You know, and I find I do that unconsciously. You know, while I'm watching something, something will catch my attention, and I'll miss the entire scene of what's going on because I'm studying something in that scene. You know, I did it with watching. What was I watching the other day? Some old horror movie. You know, that's what the Hammer movies are great for, with the lighting, with the old castles and stuff like that. And something I got fixated on how something was lit and how it receded, and the textures and the shadows and stuff like that. And I missed the entire scene. You know, but it's just you build up a visual sort of like a memory and a sensitivity to stuff.
Yeah, I was watching the Mummy was on the other night before I went to bed. Well, I fell asleep watching it, and it was lit like a Noel Sickles illustration.
Yeah.
You know,
so
lush and romantic and interesting looking, and like like everything counted.
Yeah. I mean, cast shadows. I'm cast shadows. I find to be a difficult thing to visualize without having it in front of you, because cast shadows like change the way the body moves and hits stuff. So if there's a movie that has heavy cast shadows in, I'm constantly looking at the cast shadows to see how it drapes across something. You know, because it's if it's wrong, it's wrong. You know, so trying to get that to look right is something that.
When would you say that you became aware of that kind of stuff?
I don't know. I know that I always watched TV and I watched movies, and I guess when I started painting, and I wanted to make sure the stuff looked real, I started to be more aware of the real world and how stuff looked in the real world. When I wanted to be a comic artist when I was a kid, I didn't notice any of that stuff. But I guess once I started painting and it became important that that stuff be part of my work, I became a lot more cognizant of it.
Yeah, and there's certain artists like James Bauman, was that kind of stuff was always very in the golden age guys, Tom Lavelle, Cornwell, Rockwell. I mean, that was always in their toolkit.
Right, always. Always. I mean, a massive dramatic lighting and cast shadowing, because it really added volume to what they did, you know, and they were great at that. Yeah, agreed.
All right, Joe, time for the last question.
Okay.
I don't know where the time's going. We've just blew through 2 hours.
Has it really been 2 hours? It doesn't seem like it.
I know. That's what they all say. All right. My good buddy, Douglas Holgate, who's a fantastic illustrator.
Hey, Doug.
From all the way across the world, asks the eternal question: do you have any dream projects or characters, licensed or otherwise, you'd love to work on in the future?
Well, right now I'm working on the project that has always been my dream project. I mean, I've loved the Burroughs stuff since I was a kid. So this has been my sort of my Grail project. But what I really want to do is, if I have time when all this is done before I get too old, is I want to do a photo. I'm a big cat fanatic. I love big cats and wildlife art, and I want to take some time and do a photo safari and just spend some time doing big cat paintings, you know, and sort of dipping my hand into the wildlife art market. Just to paint for myself. I haven't painted for myself, I think, ever, you know.
That's a whole different muscle.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. You know, and I find that if I'm left to my own devices, like to pick something to paint, it's like, well, what am I painting? Am I painting this for me? What's the purpose of this? You know, it's like I'm so geared commercially. You know, my brain is so wired to be a commercial artist that I find if I paint stuff for myself, I tend to go back to find something commercial to do. You know, it's weird. So I'd like to be able to relax and just paint stuff for myself for a while.
Yeah, it's funny because Julie Bell's been doing more of that.
Yeah, remarkable stuff. Remarkable.
Yeah, and I think you know, going back to school to study fine art painting, starting as commercial art, gave me maybe almost like a backwards way of looking at it, because you realize that if you start out that way, like it's like comparing Andrew Wyeth to N.C. Wyeth.
Mm-hmm.
I still like N.C. Wyeth better than Andrew Wyeth, but I love Andrew Wyeth, and they were both working from imagination, but from completely different parameters, different points, because, you know, and I don't think that maybe if his father hadn't died being killed by that train, his work might not have had that sense of angst and drama and sadness and everything to it.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things I did learn by going back to school was to allow yourself, if you're doing something personally, to basically make a lot of stuff that doesn't work.
Well, that was kind of like Jeff Jones, you know, Jeffrey. You know, I was friends with Jeff, and you know, he's a guy who went from being a purely commercial artist to painting for himself and painting whatever. It was probably the most emotional painter our industry has ever seen. You know, and he would paint whatever he felt, whether it ended up being commercial or not. It's like he veered off and he dropped out of commercial art completely and became, you know, a painter for him. And I admire the fact that he could do that. Like I said, I always end up needing a purpose for the painting I'm doing, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I think, you know, I was aware of that in a way with Buscema, because he had so trained himself to put that yoke on full that later on in his career, where he could have had the opportunity, if he wanted to be like a Mobius, he kind of almost didn't know how to do it, it seemed like.
Well, you know, a lot of people don't know this, but FPG, the company I did the Burroughs cards for back then, who was doing all the fantasy art cards, I was talking to my Freelander one time. This is back in the mid-'90s. And he said, well, what do you think about, you know, who would you think would make a good card set? I said, well, what about John? I said, you know, John always said he wanted to be a painter. I said, why don't you contact John and see if he would be interested in doing like 100 pieces of whatever he felt like doing? Because you would see him do scribbles and stuff all the time. He was constantly drawing for himself, you know, and he always said he wanted to be a painter. So Michael contacted him, and he wasn't getting a whole lot of work from Marvel at that time. And John was just like, oh my God, this is awesome. And they actually signed the contract, and John was going to do 100 pieces of whatever he felt like doing for this trading card set. and something happened up at Marvel, and he mentioned it to somebody or something, and they guilted him out of turning the job down. And I still have a copy of the letter that John sent to Michael going, "I'm so sorry, but I'm sending you back your advance, and I had to back out of this. My editor at Marvel said that they might have projects for me. This might compromise my work at Marvel, and Marvel's been really good to me over the years, and I don't want to compromise my relationship with them." So something happened where John was so excited to do this project, and somebody said, you can't do that. And he had to back out of it. But think about what 100 pieces of John doing whatever John wanted to do would have looked like,
There probably would have been 300 because he would have
exactly.
shot 200 of them.
And he'd probably still be working on it, like the Conan the Road book.
Right. Yeah.
But that to me is I lament the loss of that because he's been my idol since I was a kid. I would have killed to see what he would have done, just left up to his own devices.
So Joe, we're gonna cut it. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. I hope you could say our goodbyes we have a little outro that we do.
Okay.
Hang out with us. But this was a fantastic conversation. I hope that maybe we can have you back on maybe at the beginning of next year or a little later.
Yeah, when you're done
It's when I'm done with the next cover. Yeah. No, really, this has been a blast. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm flattered that you guys asked me.
Oh, and Joe, where can people follow you on the internet?
I'm on Facebook. It's under Joe Jusko. JoeJusko.com is my website, though I haven't updated it in a long time. I have a DeviantArt page, which I haven't updated in a long time. But mostly I'm on Facebook and Instagram under Jusko Art.
Very cool.
I don't tweet. I have a Twitter account, but I abhor Twitter, so I don't tweet.
You're probably smart to avoid the Twitter.
But yeah, I guess you could find me Instagram and Facebook are the two places right now where you can find me.
Very cool. Thank you.
I'm on Facebook all the time.
Yeah, and people get to see the awesome. Sometimes you post process shots, which I think is really just fantastic.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if people would be interested in those, but people seem to like them, so I post them as often as I can. Step by steps on the pieces I'm working on in real time. So.
Oh, that's great. So thank you so much, Joe. Hang out with us. We're going to sign off.
Sure thing.
We're going to give a shout out to our. I don't know. We're going to be on the other end of history when we have our next show on the 4th of November. Which may be apropos. We're going to have Jim Borgman on. Jim Borgman, the cartoon,
political cartoonist.
Yes.
Cartoonist and cartoonist Zitz.
That should be fun.
One of my favorite strips. We'll maybe drink our tears away and talk to Jim. But thank you guys so much for having us. Remember, we're here every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. EST. Thanks again, Joe. You were a fantastic guest, and
thank you.
I think we're best friends now.
I can't wait till all this is over. We can actually hang out somewhere.
Oh yeah.
Thank you so much. All right, so this is what we do on our way out, Joe. We kind of do some foreshortening tricks. So all you guys, you just do it with us. So you guys, we'll see you next time here on Pencil to Pencil, and you know what to do next. Wash your Kirby hand.
Where am I?
There you go.
There's my big Kirby hand.
There you go. Awesome. Thanks a lot. Have a great night.
All right. Take care, guys. Thanks.